This is Damon Fordham, adjunct professor of history at the Citadel and at Charleston Southern University, as well as an author and historian. Now, most of you are familiar with what I just played just now, Michael Jackson's popular song of some 20 years ago called "You Are Not Alone." And I often think about that when I consider the fact that many black people in the United States as well as other places, they seem to have this attitude, many of them, should I say, seem to have this idea that they are, as the great African author Frantz Fanon put it, the wretched of the earth. Many people really believe that they have this inability to unite and that other people somehow have their act together better than they do. And if you really look deep into the matter, that problem is way deeper than they think, and in all actuality, you are not alone. Here's what I mean by that. It's true that we as black people have gone through what we've gone through is unique in some aspects, but it may surprise you that the more personal you think something is, the more universal it is in reality. I want you to think about the following for a moment. Listen to this quote. "When I was born, we were not yet developed. Even as I crawled from my mother's womb, there was no one to show us the way to open our minds. The only thing that people feared was that our eyes might see and ears might hear." Deep, huh? Sounds like something that maybe Frederick Douglass or Malcolm X or Minister Louis Farrakhan or somebody like that might say, or even Dr. King. Well, guess what? It was none of them. It was from a book called Prison Notes, written in 1914 by a Vietnamese revolutionary by the name of Phan Boi Chau. And during that time, the French had dominated Vietnam, and their rule had ruined the self-esteem of their people. Phan Boi Chau went to jail for trying to free the Vietnamese people, and while he was in jail, he wrote about these varying conditions of the Vietnamese people. And the purpose of this is not necessarily to teach you Vietnamese history, but to show that other groups of oppressed people have felt the same way about themselves as many black Americans do today. Here's another quote to consider. "They told us that our ways were bad. They said that we must get civilized, which meant be like the white man. After a while, we began to say that we were bad. We laughed at our own people and their languages and their cultures and traditions." Once again, that's something that many African Americans could relate to, because many black people have laughed at or scorned other black people whose way of speech or their facial features or their behavior was considered more ethnic than others, and people who were thus considered more ethnic were thus considered more backward or ignorant and so on and so forth. But guess what? That was not a black person who made that statement that I just read to you. That was actually a Pueblo Indian by the name of Son Elk, during an interview that he did with a man named Edward Ellaby for his book, Indians of the Americas. You see, Son Elk was speaking about how Native American children would go to these special schools where they were forced to get rid of their quote-unquote Indian way of life and basically assimilate into European American standards, and they had their hair cut off and their clothes exchanged for those of European Americans. And thus it taught them to hate themselves. Again, sound familiar? Now, another example of this is this kid that I knew when I was at the University of South Carolina named Big Bill. He's from Monroe, North Carolina. He was a big hulking fellow who was a great wrestler and would wrestle fellows in the dormitory and was an all-around well-liked guy. But I noticed that his self-esteem was very low. You see, he was a country boy, and he would tell me sometimes about how the teachers told him that he was not college material because of who his parents were and his background and all of that. And he had to really fight to have the self-esteem to do well in school. I've often wondered what happened to him. And I'm sure, again, that's something that many African Americans can relate to. But guess what? Big Bill was white. A country boy from the backwoods of Monroe, North Carolina, who just simply happened to be born on the wrong side of the tracks, and thus he grew up with people looking down on him with low self-esteem. Now, here's another thing I want to share with you. This is from, get this, Skin whitening products were often used by our people to make them lighter. Skin lightening clinics and businesses were popular as well. The beautiful people, such as actors and other celebrities, endorse these skin lightening procedures. Children are told to stay away from the sun so they do not get too dark. Hey, again, that sounds familiar, right? Well, guess what? That statement was not written by a black person. That was from a book called Brown Skin, White Minds by E.J.R. David about low self-esteem among Filipinos and Filipino Americans. See, folks, the point of this is this. As I said a little bit earlier, the more personal you think your problems are, the more universal they are in reality. There are a lot of people around the world who have suffered from the disturbing effects of colonization and low self-esteem and classism as well as racism. And we would do well to understand that and also get with such people from time to time and collectively figure out ways how to overcome these illnesses. In the meantime, as you understand that your situation is not as solitary as you think, that may also help you think a little bit differently about yourself. Because you see, Azalea Johnson, a great writer from Abbeville, South Carolina, once said, "Those who don't read grow up with minds shackled to the babblings of others." So when you grow up hearing all these terrible things about your own people, unless you read your way out of that kind of thinking, you will grow up with that negative state of mind. And once you have a negative state of mind, you are paralyzed for life. So basically, read your way out of freedom. Read your way out of slavery and into freedom. And think better about yourself. So as human beings in general, we could all collectively do better. This is Damon Fordham letting you know that you are not alone.